The view opens high above Jerusalem. From the air, the old city looks like a living manuscript. Every wall, every rooftop, every shadow telling a fragment of an ancient story. The golden dome of the rock catches the morning sun, a sudden blaze against the muted stone of the city. Not far away, the silver dome of Al-Aqsa rests in solemn stillness, surrounded by cypress trees and quiet courtyards worn smooth by centuries of footsteps. Below, the alleyways twist like rivers between stone. Markets spill with colors and scents. Spices in burlap sacks. Bread warm from the oven. Dates glistening in trays. You hear the mingling of voices. Hebrew, Arabic, Greek, English. Church bells ring in the distance, and from another quarter, the call to prayer sweeps over the rooftops. But on this day, the air carries more than sound. There is a tightness, as if the whole city is holding its breath. Armed guards watch from behind barricades. Camera crews set their lenses toward the mount. Streams of pilgrims press toward the gates, each carrying their own story, their own vision of the sacred. This is the Temple Mount, 35 acres of stone and history, contested for centuries. And this is not an ordinary day. It is Tisha B'Av, the date when Jewish memory bends under the weight of loss. On this day, the first temple, built by Solomon, was burned by the Babylonians in 586 BCE. On the same date, centuries later, the second temple was torn down by Rome in 70 CE. For Muslims, this is the site of the Prophet Muhammad's night journey to heaven. For Christians, it is the place where Jesus taught, and where he warned that not one stone would be left on another. Every step here carries the weight of prophecy and the potential to change the world. 3,000 Jews pray publicly on the Temple Mount. On this year's Tisha B'Av, something happened that would have been unthinkable a generation ago. From the first light of morning, small groups of Jewish visitors began to enter the Temple Mount. Normally, these visits are quiet, even tense. Short walks along a set route, closely monitored by police. But today, the sound was different. Voices rose, unhidden. Psalms were spoken aloud. The words carried through the air. By midday, there were nearly 3,000 worshippers. Not activists from the fringes, but a cross-section of Israel's religious life. Young families with children clutching prayer books, elderly men leaning on canes, teenagers with tzitzit swaying at their sides, soldiers in uniform still carrying the weight of service. They faced the place where the Holy of Holies once stood and prayed as if no barrier remained. This breaks with a long-standing arrangement, the status quo agreed upon in 1967, after Israel gained control of East Jerusalem. Under that understanding, Muslims would continue to oversee the Mount's religious life, while Jews could visit but not pray. The rule was enforced strictly. Even a whisper of Hebrew prayers could bring intervention from police. Yet on this day, prayer was not hidden. It was visible, public. And it took place on the very anniversary of the temple's destruction. A date meant for mourning, turned by many here into a statement of hope, even defiance. In the past, such gatherings have often sparked clashes. In the 1990s and early 2000s, smaller prayer groups were met with shouting crowds, stones thrown, and riot police moving in. Sometimes these moments ended in injury or worse. But this year, something shifted. There was tension, yes, but not the eruption many expected. Some believe this was due to a calculated decision by authorities to manage the day differently. Others wonder if the public mood itself is changing. The sheer size of this gathering matters. When something moves from the margins to the mainstream, its meaning changes. The presence of so many young worshippers suggests that a new generation is less willing to accept restrictions their parents lived with. For them, The mount is not only a memory from Scripture, it is a place they believe they should stand and pray. There is also the symbolic timing. To pray here on Tisha B'Av is to stand in the very place where destruction once came, and to declare that the story is not over. For some, this act is prophetic, a glimpse of what could come if the temple were rebuilt. For others, it is a reminder that every visible shift on this mountain sends ripples far beyond Jerusalem. It is worth asking, is this simply one unusual day, or the start of something that cannot be rolled back? Itamar Ben-Gvir's new policy. The events of Tisha B'Av did not appear from nowhere. They unfolded in the shadow of a political declaration that had already unsettled the city's delicate balance. Earlier this year, Itamar Ben-Gvir, Israel's national security minister, stood before reporters and said something no senior government official had said so plainly in decades. Jews can pray anywhere on the Temple Mount. The statement was short. The consequences were anything but. For more than 50 years, the rule was clear. Jews could visit, but visits were framed as tourism. No bowing, no murmuring, no visible devotion. Police watched closely for even subtle gestures. The idea was to prevent any spark that might ignite wider unrest. Ben-Gvir's words challenged all of that. He did not frame them as a temporary allowance or a private opinion, but as a principle, a matter of right. The reaction was swift. Jordan, the recognized custodian of the Mount's Islamic sites, condemned the statement as a provocation. Palestinian leaders warned it would lead to confrontation. International observers cautioned that even small changes here can send shockwaves through the region. But for those in the Temple movement, this was a turning point. They heard, in the voice of a government minister, an acknowledgement of their long-held position. That Jewish prayer on the Mount is not only possible, but legitimate. In politics, precedent is powerful. Once a policy is spoken aloud by those in authority, it begins to reshape what is seen as acceptable. Rolling it back becomes costly. The status quo of the last half-century was built on silence, and silence has now been broken. This raises a pressing question. If open Jewish prayer is no longer unthinkable, what other steps might follow? Increased access? Expanded religious activity? Even, one day, the restoration of the temple itself? For those who view the Temple Mount as the center of biblical prophecy, such questions are not theoretical. They are urgent. Because in this place, history has shown that what begins as words can, in time, become stone. Red Heifer Sacrifice. Near the Temple Mount, in the weeks leading up to Tisha B'Av, another event quietly unfolded, one that may have gone unnoticed by most of the world, yet is charged with deep biblical symbolism. On a clear morning, within sight of the Temple Mount's walls, a group of men in white garments gathered in an open space. They were not actors in a reenactment, nor tourists playing a role. They were Kohanim, Jewish priests, trained in the ancient rites of temple service, and before them stood a flawless, red-coated heifer. The ceremony that followed was not the full biblical ritual described in Numbers 19, but a carefully choreographed preparation, a public demonstration of the Para Aduma sacrifice. According to Scripture, the ashes of a perfect red heifer, burned together with cedar wood, hyssop, and scarlet wool, were required to purify those who would serve in the temple. Without this purification, no priest could enter the sacred courts. The tradition holds that from the days of Moses until the destruction of the Second Temple, only 9 red heifers were ever sacrificed. The Mishnah, in Tractate Para 3:5, records this number and adds a tantalizing note. The 10th will be prepared in the days of the Messiah. This particular event was framed as a practice, But the symbolism was hard to ignore. The location, close enough to see the Temple Mount, carried a deliberate message. If the gates opened tomorrow, the preparations for temple service could begin at once. In past decades, such ceremonies have drawn fierce opposition. Muslim leaders have often viewed them as a provocation, interpreting them as a direct step toward altering the status quo on the Mount. Demonstrations of this kind have at times been met with protests, heated rhetoric, even threats of violence. But this time, the reaction was muted. No major protests swelled. No wave of international condemnation followed. Perhaps this was due to the many distractions of a region already in turmoil, from political upheaval to ongoing conflict in Gaza and beyond. Or perhaps it is because the symbolic groundwork has been laid so gradually that it now draws less resistance. For those steeped in the biblical narrative, the sight of a red heifer in Jerusalem is not merely curious. It is a reminder that the requirements for temple restoration are not only political or architectural, they are ceremonial, rooted in Torah law. And for some, this practiced sacrifice was more than preparation. It was a statement. We are ready. If you step back from each of these moments, the mass prayer on Tisha B'Av, the policy shift from Israel's security minister, the red heifer ceremony, a larger picture begins to emerge. In recent years, the number of Jewish visitors to the Temple Mount has reached record highs. For decades, many observant Jews avoided the Mount entirely, following rabbinic rulings that warned of accidentally entering the most sacred areas in a state of ritual impurity. But that caution is eroding. Now, younger religious Zionists not only visit, they do so in organized groups, often led by rabbis who guide them in permitted areas and encourage prayer, quiet or otherwise. Temple movement organizations have seized the moment. They run tours that explain the layout of the ancient courts, training programs that teach the details of sacrificial rites, and media campaigns that speak openly about rebuilding the temple. What once sounded like the language of a small, determined minority is now voiced in mainstream religious and political circles. Archaeology has played a role in this shift as well. Excavations in the city of David, just south of the Mount, have uncovered seal impressions from priestly families mentioned in the Bible, ritual vessels that match descriptions from the temple service, and inscriptions in ancient Hebrew that affirm Jewish presence here long before the Roman destruction. Every discovery becomes a new thread in a tapestry of historical legitimacy. These finds are not merely academic. For many, they are tangible proof that the connection between the Jewish people and the Temple Mount is not a matter of belief alone. It is embedded in the soil, the stone, and the written record. Taken together, these religious shifts, political moves, and archaeological confirmations are not isolated events. They are signals, indicators that the ground, both literal and symbolic, is being prepared for something larger. When you place the events of recent months against the pages of Scripture, the parallels are striking, and for many, impossible to ignore. The prophet Daniel, in chapter 9, verse 27, speaks of a future leader who will confirm a covenant, and then, in the middle of a prophetic week, bring an end to sacrifice and offering. For this prophecy to be fulfilled literally, those sacrifices must first be restored, which means a functioning temple. The Apostle Paul, in 2 Thessalonians 2, 3-4, warns of a man of lawlessness who will set himself up in God's temple, proclaiming himself to be divine. The Apostle John, in Revelation 11, 1-2, records being told to measure the temple but to leave out the outer court, which would be given to the nations, a detail that has led some to imagine a future temple sharing the Mount with existing Islamic structures. For centuries, these passages have stirred debate. Are they symbolic or literal? Are they past or future? But for many evangelical scholars, the simplest reading is also the most compelling. That these verses speak of an actual temple standing in Jerusalem during the final days before Christ's return. If that is true, then what we are seeing now may be more than political developments. They may be the scaffolding of prophecy taking shape. Consider it: Jewish prayer becoming normalized on the Mount. Government officials openly challenging the status quo. Priests trained and red heifers prepared. A generation no longer content with visiting as tourists, but seeking to worship on the very ground they believe God chose for His dwelling. Even the tensions themselves bear a prophetic echo. Jesus warned in Matthew 24 that when the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel stands in the holy place, those in Judea should flee. He spoke of deception, tribulation, and the gathering of nations. He also spoke of the gospel being preached to all the world before the end comes. And so we stand in a moment where political defiance, religious fervor, and archaeological testimony converge. This convergence is not happening quietly. It is unfolding in full view of the world. Yet, for those not watching, it is easy to miss the pattern. What if the events of today are the early rumblings before the earthquake? What if the groundwork for prophecy is being laid not in secret, but in plain sight, step by step, policy by policy, prayer by prayer? The Temple Mount is more than an archaeological site, more than a political flashpoint. It is, in the eyes of millions, the prophetic epicenter of the world. What happens here does not stay here. It ripples outward, shaping headlines, shifting alliances, and, if Scripture is to be believed, setting the stage for events that will shake the nations. Every shift in policy, every discovery beneath the stones, every prayer whispered or spoken aloud is like the ticking of a clock. Not a clock set by human hands, but one wound by the author of history. And so we are left with a question. If what we are witnessing is the beginning of these things, how much time remains before the story reaches its climax? And more importantly, when that day comes, will we be ready? The signs are there for those willing to see. The Scriptures have spoken for those willing to hear. The choice, as always, is not only to watch the world change, but to prepare our own hearts. Watch the signs, discern the times. Prepare, not with fear, but with hope. Because if prophecy is indeed moving toward fulfillment, then the return of the King is not a distant theory. It is a coming reality. And the question is no longer if, it is when.